Good afternoon, Apollo Baptist Church. It is Monday. It is September 28th. It's not morning, it's afternoon. Our reading plan for this week is 2 Samuel chapters 10 through 13. And one of the most remembered parts of David's life is in chapter 11. It's a very unfortunate part of his life. It is his sin with Bathsheba. And 2 Samuel chapter 11 gives the account of that. David went out in the evening on his balcony. His palace was very large. It was very high. Possibly his palace was built on a terrain that was already higher. He could oversee much of the city. When he was on the looking over his balcony, he saw a lady who was bathing. I don't think that's a good idea, but she was. And he didn't just glance and then glance away. He stared. He lusted. In fact, lust burned in him to such a degree that it controlled, it overwhelmed, it obsessed his abilities to control himself. And so he wanted to find out, who is this beautiful lady? And he found out, oh, that is Bathsheba. And it says in our reading in chapter 11, verse 3, that is Bathsheba. Her husband is Uriah, and her daddy is Eliam. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to you or me, but oh, it meant a lot to David. You see, David was king. He was king of Israel. And he had a special forces unit. It was kind of his Green Beret group. They were the select warriors. They were called the 30. Uriah was one of them. Eliam was one of them. Do you think David knew who they were? Trusted, depended on them. They cared for him. They sacrificed much for him. And then there was another gentleman who was very connected to the life of David, who was very connected to Bathsheba. We already have Bathsheba's husband. He's one of the 30. Bathsheba's daddy. He's one of the 30. Bathsheba's grandpa. Bathsheba's grandpa is Ahithophel. Ahithophel was one of David's primary counselors. It's kind of like in his cabinet, he had some leaders of his cabinet. Ahithophel was one of his main counselors. Do you think he depended on Ahithophel? Yeah. Do you think he cared for Ahithophel? Yes. Do you think he had great affection for Ahithophel? Yes. And yet, when he finds out who this beautiful lady is that he is lusting after, all of these other relationships, two of his leading warriors, special forces, two of them, Uriah and Eliam, and the grandfather of this lady, Ahithophel, all of those relationships are not more powerful than this overwhelming desire for the flesh to control and for the sexual desire to be fulfilled. And so David does go on with this adulterous act. Unfortunately, he did that. And then he finds out Bathsheba's pregnant. Oh, well, we got to cover it up. And so the whole issue of the lust and the sin and the result, pregnancy, all of it lumped together, he says, well, Uriah, her husband, he would love to come home and have sexual relationships with his wife. And so he'll do that. I'll call him home, have a meeting with him. He'll go home, have a nice evening with his wife, have sexual relationships. He won't know but what it's his baby, and it'll all be covered up. Well, the truth of the matter is he wouldn't go do that. Called him up, would not go to be with his wife. And so David said, that's not working. I have another plan. He sent Uriah back to battle. He sent a note, put him on the front lines. in the heat of the battle, pull away, and he will be killed. And it looked like a war casualty, when in fact it was a planned casualty. David had to get rid of Uriah. Why? Why? Where did all this come from? Lust, sexual lust. It is to be respected. It is more powerful than you and I have the abilities to withstand. And I mean that. Don't think that you are more powerful than that. David had a great love for God. He had a heart after God. And yet David fell to the incredible power of sexual lust. Don't think that you're more powerful than David. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, we are admonished in verse 18, flee immorality. That means run like crazy. Feet don't fail me now. And that is our attitude. So you can say, well, just don't ever lust. I wish we could say that, but this side of heaven, that's not going to happen. So then what do we do? When you realize there is lust in the air, don't give it a second glance. David didn't just glance at that lady and say, whoa, I'm not looking back at that. No, he stared. He stared. And he desired. And he was overwhelmed. And it took advantage of him. No. You and I need to turn away at the moment of the first glance. Practice turning away. Don't give it a second thought. Flee immorality. Why? Because it has the power to ruin your life. Now, let's close with this. God does forgive all sin. Oh, aren't we so glad? And God did forgive David for this sin. When he confessed it, God cleansed him completely. But sexual sin has the ability to ruin our life because of the consequences that it causes. And so while God does in fact forgive, there are consequences that many times will never go away. We can avoid those if we simply do what God said. Flee immorality. Don't give it a second look or a second chance. Respect the power of lust. That's a warning to you and to me and to us. God bless you. God loves you. That's why he put this bad chapter in the book, so that you and I would read it and not follow in it.